Opportunity Calls with Ellen Volpe is sponsored by LongIsland.com.
Joining me today is Doug Rowe, a partner in the law firm Certilman, Balin, Adler, and Hyman. Doug, you represent the employment group, labor and employment group at the firm. There are so many issues facing business owners today, from sexual harassment to discrimination, wage and hour, as well as many other employment-related claims. It's really a virtual minefield for business owners today. And since the arrival of COVID and the need for many non-essential workers to be working at home, I believe these issues have become even more onerous for an employer. I'm wondering if you could speak today to the importance of tracking the work time and the schedules during this particularly hard place to be, and because remote work is so common. Can you really speak to some of the liabilities today that are facing employers?
Thank you, Ellen. I'm going to address your question, but before I do that, I'm going to give you the top 10 claims that we see arising out of the pandemic. First of all, there was the emergency legislation called the Families First Coronavirus Act, FFCRA, which requires employers to permit their employees to take paid leave of absence. So employers have to be aware of that. And again, that's new legislation. Also arising out of the pandemic is an increase in accommodation claims under the Americans with Disabilities Act, under the Family and Medical Leave Act. Employers have to provide their employees with a reasonable accommodation. That's a fact-intensive inquiry as to employees' entitlements. There's been a rise in discrimination cases, based upon a perception by employers that older employees may be more vulnerable to catching the coronavirus in the workplace, so maybe they'd be inclined not to permit them to come back into the workplace. There's also a perception, for example, that pregnant employees also may be more vulnerable to greater risk. So, employers have to be careful when they address issues like that. Failure to follow WARN Act notices. Employers, whether it be by federal law or state law, are required to give their employees advance notice arising out of a mass layoff. Obviously, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had mass layoffs in many different companies, and notices were required. And if notices weren't required, a certain amount of notice pay was also required. So that's something that has created litigation as well. Health-related claims, for example, many employees could think that they actually contracted the coronavirus in the workplace. That could result in workers' comp claims, for example, even though that would be a hard thing to prove. Nevertheless, that's created claims. We have cybersecurity and trade secret claims. Now with employees working from home as much as they are, employers have to be cautious of protecting their trade secrets with employees, using their own computers with employees, not necessarily paying attention to the same computer issues that they have in the office. And there are several other potential claims as well. Employers have to pay attention to employee benefit issues and potential whistleblower claims by employees who feel that the workplace isn't safe enough to work. With respect to that, though, we've seen like the biggest issues and most of the claims are arising out of potential wage and hour issues. So larger employers may have many employees who now the employers want to have medical screening every day. So if an employer has literally hundreds of employees who each day have to have their temperature taken, well, is the time that employees have to wait online to be screened compensable time? That's one of the issues. The answer is it appears that that's compensable time, but there hasn't been a lot of case law arising out of that yet. Telework challenges. Employers have an obligation to keep track of employees' time. Employees may have a tendency when they're working from home to work whenever they want. They wake up, they go to work, they stop working, they come back to work. So it's important for the employer to make sure that the employee follows a schedule. Let's say it's 9 to 5. That's the time the employee works. Employers are also required to provide meal periods and rest periods for their employees. Well, the law is the same whether they work from home or in the office. So employers have to make sure that employees are complying with the meal period laws as well.
I had a whole list of questions to ask you, and you're answering them really in one breath because it's so overwhelming.
I didn't even mention all the potential liability claims. Just let me mention this because this is strange to think about, but nevertheless, it's an issue. Mm-hmm. But employers have to provide a safe workplace. When employees work from home, that's their workplace. Mm-hmm. And if an employee gets injured at home, that's covered by workers' comp. Mm-hmm. So, that's another reason why you have to have a telework policy, which really reminds the employees of their obligations to the employer and really trying to get employees also to think about the fact that their home is now the workplace. Mm-hmm. And they have the same obligations at home that they do at the physical work location.
So if a company actually makes an amendment to a policy and procedure manual, is there some type of a signature that has to be documented so that the employees basically acknowledge that these changes for COVID situations have taken place? Or is it enough for the company to update this manual, and are there any assumptions being made?
Smart employers will prepare an employee handbook. Smart employers will require their employees to sign an acknowledgement of receipt of the employee handbook. The employee handbooks usually contain a provision that says the employer has the right to make amendments, modifications to the handbook at any time with or without notice. But again, the best advice is if there are amendments, if there are modifications if the employees are working from home, to send them to the employees and ask the employee to acknowledge receipt of that amendment. And put it in their personnel file, and that way, there won't be any question as to the employee's, knowledge of that existing policy.
So it's sort of a funny question and probably almost impossible to answer. What would your advice be to somebody that all of a sudden is seeing this maybe for the first time? Not necessarily the first time, but putting it all together in one place as a red light, so to speak. What would your advice be? Where would a person like that actually start?
By contacting their employment lawyer. But short of that, yes. As I said before, it's important to have the employee handbook. But depending on the size of the company, it's important also to make sure that they train their managers, because you could have a business owner who knows about these laws, but unless they train their managers on the existence of these laws, how to track, the hours, how to avoid discrimination claims, they're going to fail anyway. So, the best advice I could give is, to be aware of these issues, to have written policies, which I think is first and foremost, but also if the employer is aware of these issues, to make sure that everybody who makes decisions regarding employees, such as managers, are aware of these issues so they can actually formulate and make the proper decisions in the workplace.
It's really been great to have you, because I know you for so long, and your fan club would say thank you very much, Doug Rowe.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after this short break with David Faverio of Pupfish.
Opportunity Calls with Ellen Volpe is presented by ABA, American Business Associates. To learn more about ABA, visit aba-ny.com.
David Faverio, CEO of a new and welcomed addition to Long Island. Your trifecta of experience in finance, distribution, and operations has led you to this entrepreneurial chapter in your life. Pupfish Sustainable Solutions, I tried to say that 3 times fast, offering sustainable solutions to managing end-of-life electronic assets with environmental compliance. With so many people working from home, buying new equipment, businesses upgrading, downsizing, new materials, there's a superabundance of electronics, too much to end up in the landfill. First, I have to ask you the story behind the name.
And honestly, that's a question that everybody asks me. It's not very common here, but a pupfish is a small fish that lives in Death Valley. They live in extreme conditions. They've lived under those conditions for thousands of years. Wow. They have to use resiliency, adaptability, and basically survive in these conditions. And their biggest challenge right now is the result of man-made interference in their habitat. To us, pupfish embodies what companies, and we want to embody from a company perspective, being resiliency, adaptability, and the ability to survive under the most challenging conditions. But it also embodies what my dad's companies embody in terms of transparency, meeting the customer's needs, and integrity. So we were able to capture all of that in the name Pupfish, and I think it tells our story.
I've known you for a while, and I'm very curious as to, at this point, why you ultimately decided to start the business.
I started my career in commercial lending many years ago, and that was a great start in that I got to see and analyze many different companies and what they did right and what they did wrong. From there, I went into corporate finance, where I worked at large public companies, small startups, anything from manufacturing to wholesale distribution to security. I even worked at a company that did lead certification, which ties in with this. When we thought about starting a company, we wanted to get involved with something that really was able to help companies, and especially companies now with their electronics and what they're going to do with them. And the fact that data security is so important, as well as the end-of-life electronics. So we were basically able to tie everything together in terms of what these companies need and our love for the environment.
Where are you operating and how does it work? Because I still drive around and see, machinery at the curb. And every time I see it, the hair on the back of my neck stands up and I wonder, I know that the local towns have some regulations, but I don't really understand how they get enforced. And I'm very curious about how people can find you and what your company is about. How do we sign up? Sure.
We've secured a facility in Hauppauge, which is both office and warehouse, a fairly large facility. And the idea is that we will grow into a bigger facility as the needs require. But we chose Hauppauge for a number of reasons. First of all, we view the Hauppauge Industrial Park as a hub for commerce and manufacturing. And those are probably the companies we can help pretty significantly. Plus, it's pretty central to Long Island and the New York metro area, which is our marketplace. So we can get to our customers as they require to pick up their equipment. Or if they're more comfortable, they can drop the equipment off here, which is what some will want to do with their hard drives. One of the reasons why we started Pupfish is because we are all environmentally conscious. We all live on Long Island. We work on Long Island. We've grown up on Long Island. And it's very important that Long Island is a sustainable environment for us. One of the facts we came across was that in America, 2% of the landfill is filled with electronic waste, but it comprises 70% of the toxins that enter the ground. So it's very significant, especially here on Long Island where groundwater is so important. That's where we get our drinking water. So we want to do our best to keep the toxins out of our environment. So you see a lot of this equipment on the side of the road or thrown away because people just don't know. I don't think they understand the environmental impact. So we're trying to bring with our company the corporate responsibility and teaching that corporate responsibility. And the fact that there are rules and regulations which could result in fines, or if the hard drives, there's data breaches and sensitive information goes out, there's huge implications to that. And we are out here to market ourselves to say, you know, listen, we know that companies may be cutting back right now. They may or may not have the IT staff. Either way, we want to partner with the company to take away that requirement. You know, they can call us. If they need us to remove hard drives in the equipment, we'll remove hard drives in the equipment. If they want no touch service and they just want to leave it on their loading dock and we'll show up and put it in our vehicle and take it away, we'll do that. If they want, again, if they want to drop it off, or if they want to accompany the hard drives here to view the data destruction, they can do that also. So we're trying to make it very easy for our customers. We're also trying to meet their regulatory and statutory needs. We're trying to reduce their risks. We're trying to get them to help the environment. And we are trying to make sure that we are protecting their data and the data of their customers and employees. We have a zero landfill policy here at Pupfish. So anything we get, nothing ends up in the landfill. We will break everything down to the lowest common denominator that's required, where we can then pass it along to a true person who does the recycling and the breaking down of the metals or the PC boards or the plastics, so that they can then be reintroduced back into the manufacturing cycle. So not only does it keep those toxins out of the landfills, but it also reduces the need for the mining of that information and the mining of those materials, and all of the environmental hazards that come along with that.
Yeah. So end-of-life electronics, could you define what that means from the little to the large?
We will handle really any type of electronic equipment, from your keyboard or your mouse or your cell phone to large file servers. We will take copiers. We are breaking into the medical equipment field. We'll take medical equipment right now, not the really big items, but anything along those lines. And, I think the takeaway from that is anything that basically is electronic, especially that has a hard drive, to protect the data and the people.
Something that I learned myself when I got rid of a copy machine is that most people don't realize that the copy machine also is a computer.
Yes.
And I was a little bit shocked to learn that sometimes these machines are just discarded with their little computer in them, which is quite risky.
Correct. Yeah, it has hard drives. And even if you take a hard drive out of a computer, if the battery's left in on the motherboard, the small chips on there may still have some residual data in there. So that's part of our process, is to make sure we get all of the data off of the machine and it's all destroyed correctly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so excited for you to start, in particular in this environment.
Yes.
I have one last question, and I know you're involved in an organization that raises funds by traversing the Great South Bay, and I was wondering if you could leave us with that.
I'm on the committee for the Maggie Fischer Memorial Great South Bay Cross Bay Swim. We're an organization that raises funds every year in memory of Maggie Fischer. Maggie is the daughter of my friends Bob and Mary Fischer. Mm-hmm. And she was going to swim the race for the first time when she turned 16. You have to be 16 to swim the race. Mm-hmm. And she passed away 2 days before the swim in a car accident. Mm-hmm. So now they do the swim in her memory, and we raise funds, and the funds go to St. Anthony's Scholarship, because she attended St. Anthony. She had just graduated from there. Mm-hmm. And it also goes to hospice, because the family used Long Island Hospice and their services. It's a great organization that does a great thing.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Up next, I speak with Tristan Keeffe, Vice President at Generational Equity. We'll be right back after a short break.
American Business Associates is New York Metro's premier business development and networking association. To learn more about ABA, visit aba-ny.com.
Joining me today is Tristan Keeffe, entrepreneur at heart and Vice President at Generational Equity. Thanks for joining me today, Tristan.
Thank you for having me, Ellen.
These are certainly unusual times, with COVID not only exploding among our population, but also affecting the perspective that business owners have on their own future. Some businesses are exploding, reaching capacity, and others are declining. With lower interest rates, and some say a pool of ready capital, it would appear that the markets are high and traditional transactions are numerous. Typical advice to those looking to exit would be to start planning 3 to 5 years in advance. Given the speed at which things are exploding, what advice would you offer those just entering this fast-paced process?
I think it's definitely an interesting year, with the interruptions from COVID across the entire economy. That has it's slowed things down from an M&A perspective earlier on, and then as businesses triaged their own operations and either stabilized or had to come to terms with some tough conversations and decisions that needed to be made. But as the market sort of has slowly recovered from that transition, and both buyers in financial sector and also strategic buyers sort of righted their own ships, we've seen, as you mentioned, a considerable increase to M&A activity sort of Q3 forward. The advice I would give to interested sellers who want to enter that market, it's definitely a very attractive market to be joining. It's a seller's market. There is a lot of capital on the sidelines, looking to be deployed, and that is, assisting in valuation improvement for those people looking to exit their companies. What I will say is this year we've definitely seen an increase in diligence, and buyers are slower to make decisions and are doing a deeper dive than maybe they have in the past, and scrutinizing, what is today. And also, we have the added factor of the COVID and how the business has performed during COVID, which is obviously a very new situation, but it can be quite telling as well, depending on what sector the business is in. A large part of that is it points to the decision making of the ownership and how they've tackled that, whether they've pivoted with different products and services or whether they've doubled down on their core businesses and really worked to refine that.
What sectors do you see a lot of activity in? I mean, I've heard healthcare, I've heard tech, but what is your opinion?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Healthcare, obviously, with the COVID impact to the market, it's been a very hot industry right now. Technology is sort of leading that charge. And the funny thing is, industries a lot of the times these days overlap with each other, particularly with technology. We have technology, healthcare, technology, manufacturing, all across every industry. And so anything with recurring revenues is always attractive. And the scalability of a technology company is typically what makes it so attractive. And that's definitely been leading the charge in M&A for several years now. And that's definitely continued through this process, particularly as the reliance on technology and the importance of it, I think, has had a certain spotlight shone on it due to COVID and the remote workforce and all the things that go along with that. But then you also have sort of other industries that have done quite well as well. Construction, particularly in the residential sector, has done quite well simply because people are at home and they're working on their homes, or they're pulling forward renovations because they now need to get that home office set up.
Do you have an example of a transaction that you can share with us that seemed to have everything in order and came to some type of fruition?
We have to be a little bit sensitive to speaking specifics about individual businesses that have sold, because a lot of those are confidential.
Yes, certainly appreciate that. I'm wondering, we talked about some of the obvious ones, whether or not there are any categories or sectors that are surprising you in some way because they're little hidden opportunities.
Yeah, look, I think the residential construction industry was definitely one of those surprises. I wasn't foreseeing that. I thought people would be holding on to capital personally and their families. But that's played out a little differently. We have a payments company that is focused on the supplying the restaurant space and a lot of retail, small facilities, and we were expecting them to have quite a hit to the business as retail operations closed all over the country. Interestingly, what happened was that because there was turnover in those spaces, and because every firm was looking at ways to do business differently, right? Takeout, curbside pickup, all these sorts of different changes to the way we do business actually meant that all of a sudden, instead of one point of sale reader on the counter, they now needed all of their delivery guys to have a portable point of sale machine. We needed curbside delivery. So there was this explosion of sales generated for this company, despite it being at the first layer sort of counterintuitive to their end market, which was being hammered. So that's sort of one of those examples where the shift in the way we operate as a society has created opportunities in businesses that are outsized compared to what's going on in the rest of the market.
I was hoping you would share that, because I do think that sometimes we look in a very linear way at opportunities, when in fact, way out sort of on the fringe, there are all these opportunities that really are somehow missed sometimes because we're not really willing to look beyond what we think we already know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, 2020, everyone needs their creativity hat on. It's definitely a tough year, and that's tested everybody. It's hard enough managing that type of disruption in sort of the operational things you need to do as a business owner.
Before we close, I really have two things to ask you. It just has occurred to me that you're really a student of information, in particular personal development and inspiration. And I'm wondering if you could share something that you're recently looking at that you're learning, or something that you're learning from in terms of what you're involved in.
Sure. So, I'm definitely a top-down thinker personally. So I like to understand the core tenets of what's going on more so than getting into the ground level of the hottest trends today. And I've found that to be valuable, to step above the clouds a little bit and understand what is moving people to make decisions and moving people to change their behaviors. And so, I personally try to study human behavior as much as I possibly can, because ultimately that's what business is, the way we act, our willingness to trade convenience for dollars, and all of those sorts of patterns of behavior are what interests me a lot. And I get to apply and learn from seeing so many businesses, understanding the way that they perceive their clients' and customers' behavior patterns, and how do they build a business out of that, and how do they see opportunity from that. And that, I think, is one area that I've been trying to look at over the last 3-4 months, is what shifts to our way of life are we giving up willingly? Are we excited about? How does that play out in business as you move forward? And that's kind of, that's really where I spend a lot of my learning time, is trying to understand that. So I'm midway through Guns, Germs, and Steels, which is a classic I've been recommended many times, and finally got to sit down and start reading that. But they're the types of things where you learn, these are not behavioral changes of 2020. This is evolution from that, hundreds of thousands of years of the way we've done life, really, or lived life. And what comes from that ultimately determines our decision making today. We're still very much animals running around. So
you are always inspiring, and I really want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Ellen. I appreciate the invitation.
Opportunity Calls with Ellen Volpe is sponsored by LongIsland.com. American Business Associates is New York Metro's premier business development and networking association. To learn more about ABA, visit aba-ny.com.